I woke up in Adeline Vance's hospital bed with her wedding ring still on my finger, 4 hours after the Vance family had already ordered funeral flowers for her, and a voice inside my skull informed me I had 30 days to save a marriage the whole city already called dead. The voice called itself the continuance. It did not explain how I had come to be wearing someone else's life, it only explained the cost of losing it. 30 days to raise something it called contract integrity out of the single digits, or this body would finish the dying it had already started once. Contract integrity, it said, currently sat at 11%. I did not ask 11% of what. I had been awake for 4 minutes, and I already understood I was going to have to earn that answer the hard way, the same way I was apparently going to have to earn everything else in this life that wasn't already mine. Adeline Vance was 26 years old, heiress to Vance and Kestrel, a textile and luxury goods empire her mother had built out of a single garment mill, and a refusal to sell to men who assumed she would fold within a year. Married 8 months to Julian Ashcombe, heir to Ashcombe Maritime, in a wedding that had made every society page in the state and warmed no one's bed since. Her hands did not feel like hands I had grown into, narrower than mine had ever been, softer at the knuckle, with a thin white scar across one thumb I had no memory of earning. Every mirror in that room showed a stranger's face arranging itself into my expressions, and for the first 10 minutes I kept checking the corners of the room for whoever the face actually belonged to. The nurse who checked my vitals would not meet my eyes. She told me, carefully, that my husband had been informed of my condition and had already sent instructions for my discharge paperwork. Not flowers, not a visit. Instructions, initialed, delivered by courier. I asked her what had happened to me. She said the word accident the way people say words they have been told to say. Sleeping pills, wine, a bathtub, a door that had somehow not been locked when they found me, though everyone swore it always was. Under the mattress, tucked into a slit in the lining like she had not trusted a single drawer in her own house, I found a leather journal full of pressed flowers. Each one was dated. Each one had a single word beside it, and sometimes a set of initials in handwriting too careful to belong to a careless woman. The most recent flower was a sprig of yarrow, pressed flat, dated 6 days before my accident. Beside it, in ink already going brown, someone had written 2 letters, D.K. I did not know yet whose initials those were. I only knew that whoever's grief this journal belonged to, it was not finished with me, and neither, apparently, was the 30 days. Marguerite Vance had married my father 4 years after my mother died, and had spent every year since teaching her daughter Camille to stand exactly 1 step ahead of me in every photograph the family ever took. My mother, Adeline Vance, built the company out of a single mill and a stubbornness people mistook for charm right up until it wasn't convenient to call it that anymore. She died of a stroke at her own desk, mid-signature, which Marguerite had once called, in front of me, a very efficient way to go. My father died 2 years ago. Heart, sudden in his sleep. He left his shares split between his only daughter and the company's oldest board seat, a seat that belonged to Desmond Kestrel, son of my mother's original business partner. He left Marguerite a house and a title she had wanted considerably more than she had ever wanted him. The marriage to Julian Ashcombe had been arranged by 2 boardrooms, not 2 hearts. It anchored something called the Meridian Accord, a shipping and manufacturing partnership worth more than either family had said out loud in front of me, back when I still had a life of my own to be excluded from. Somewhere in this house, someone had wanted that marriage to end quietly enough that no one would ever think to ask why. I intended to make them ask. One detail from Adeline's old life kept surfacing whether I reached for it or not, the way a scar ages before rain. Every year on the anniversary of Eleanor's death, mother and daughter used to press a single flower together and write 1 word beside it, a ritual passed down like a house key. After Eleanor died, Adeline had kept doing it alone, for every day that mattered enough to survive. I understood, holding that journal, that I had inherited someone else's grief along with her body, and that had already decided to become mine. The night I supposedly chose to die alone in a bathtub, I was not there to see what actually happened. Someone else was. Marguerite Vance stirred a small paper packet into a glass of Pinot Noir at 11:40 at night, in a kitchen she believed had no cameras, because she was the one who had quietly had the last camera removed for repairs 3 weeks earlier, and never scheduled its return. She carried the glass upstairs herself. She told the girl in that room the same thing she had told her 100 times before, in a voice soft enough to sound like love if you didn't already know better. "Drink this," she said. It will help you sleep. You have been so tired lately, sweetheart. Everyone has noticed. Desmond Kestrel was waiting in the hallway when she came out, checking his watch instead of the door behind her. 20 minutes, he said. Then we move the paperwork before anyone else in this house wakes up. He tapped the folder under his arm once, like a man checking a pulse. The reversion paperwork is already drafted, he said. Board absorbs her shares. The severance guarantees Eleanor built into the charter get renegotiated inside a fiscal quarter, and nobody has to explain to a single shareholder why Vance is still sitting on a seat she never once had to fight for. She will sign anything by morning, Marguerite said, or she will not need to. Either way, the accord reverts to the board inside the window, and the board answers to us before it answers to a girl who has never run a single meeting alone in her life. Neither of them said my name once in that hallway. They said the company's name 4 times. I met my husband for the first time, as far as either of us was concerned, 11 hours after I had nearly drowned in his family's shared bad luck. Julian Ashcombe was tall in the specific, punishing way of men raised to fill a room without asking permission to be in it. He looked at me the way you look at a line item you are already tired of explaining to a board. You are discharged today, he said. Bennett will have papers for you by Friday. I asked him what papers. Separation of assets, he said, like a weather report. There is no reason to drag this out longer than the accord requires of either of us. I did not cry. I had apparently already used up whatever tears belonged to this face, on people who were not even in the room to see it happen. He left before I could ask a single real question. It took me 40 minutes to stop being surprised by that, and exactly 1 text message to remember what surprise felt like. An unknown number, no name, no photo, 5 words. Don't drink anything she offers you. I asked who this was. The answer took 11 minutes. Someone who's been trying to keep you alive longer than you think, it said. Call me Harbor. I spent that first afternoon walking rooms I was apparently supposed to already know by heart. The wedding portraits lining the east corridor showed a bride and groom standing exactly 4 inches apart in every single frame, never touching, wearing the specific smile people save for photographers instead of each other. 2 housemaids stopped talking the moment I turned a corner, the way people go quiet around something they've already decided is temporary. The one warm thing in that house that first week was a housekeeper named Dorothy Chandler, who had worked for Eleanor Vance for 11 years before she ever worked for anyone who married into the name. Dorothy brought me tea I hadn't asked for and told me, without being asked, that your mother used to sit in that exact chair when the board made her furious, and that she never once let them see it on her face until she was already halfway down the stairs. She's the only one in this house who still says your mother's name like it isn't an inconvenience, Dorothy added, and went back to the kitchen before I could thank her for it. Contract integrity moved from 11% to 14% overnight, which the continuance informed me, unhelpfully, counted as progress. I did not feel like I was making a marriage more real. I felt like I was diffusing something with the casing still warm. Camille found me on the 3rd morning, sitting in what used to be my mother's garden, holding a flower press I didn't remember owning until my hands already knew its weight. You look so much better, she said, in the voice she reserved for compliments that weren't, almost like a person who isn't planning to inconvenience everyone twice in 1 year. I asked her what she meant by twice. She smiled the way people smile when they've already decided you won't remember the conversation afterward. If the accord reverts, she said, Trevor's family has floated the idea of me instead. Julian's cousin. Similar bloodline. Considerably less baggage. Less baggage, repeated. She shrugged, delicate as a girl who had never once had to carry anything heavier than an opinion. You did always take up more room than you earned, Adeline. Mother says it's in the blood. That was the first mask slip. It would not be the last, and it would not, by a long distance, be the coldest. Bennett Holloway was the kind of lawyer who wore his caution like cologne, applied early, reapplied often, glancing at doors like he expected someone to walk through them who shouldn't. He came to the house on the 5th day with a folder he clearly did not want to open in front of Marguerite. The Meridian Accord has a reversion clause, he said, quiet enough that I had to lean in to hear it. If the marriage anchoring it dissolves before the shares vest, and there's no direct Vance heir left to inherit them outright, the board absorbs them by vote. I asked who chaired that board. Desmond Kestrel, he said, has since your father passed. I asked how long the window. 25 days, he said, and something in his face tightened. The same vesting date, as it happens. as whatever the hospital couldn't quite explain when they discharged you early instead of holding you for observation like the chart recommended. I thought about a glass of wine I hadn't been awake to see poured, and 2 initials pressed into a flower 6 days before an accident that had stopped sounding like an accident to me at all. 2 days later, the Accord's board scheduled a joint press appearance to reassure investors that nothing had changed, which meant Julian and I were expected to stand in front of 40 cameras and prove exactly the opposite of everything currently true. He briefed me in the car with the tone of a man reading out safety instructions before takeoff. "Smile when I touch your elbow," he said. "Don't correct any numbers I quote, even the wrong ones. If someone asks about the accident, I answer, not you." I asked him what happened if I smiled at the wrong moment. "Then we'll match," he said, and something almost like humor moved through his voice before he caught it and put it away again. I've been told my own smile is wrong most of the time too. On the platform, his hand found my elbow exactly on cue, and for one unscripted second, his thumb moved once against my sleeve, small enough that no camera in that room could have caught it. It wasn't for the cameras. I was fairly sure standing there, it wasn't entirely for the Accord either. Afterward, in the car, he told me my answer about the accident had been better than his own would have been. I told him that was a low bar, considering his own answer to almost everything so far had been Bennett will have papers by Friday. For the first time since I'd opened Adeline's eyes, he almost laughed. That same week, a gossip column ran 3 paragraphs about the tragic Mrs. Ashcombe's fragile nerves since her hospitalization, quoting an unnamed family source close to situation. Nobody in the house admitted to being that source. Everybody in the house already knew exactly who it was. By the following week, a second item ran, this one naming a specific psychiatric facility upstate and a specific admission date that did not exist anywhere except in whoever's imagination had invented it. Reporters called the house twice asking me to confirm a stay I'd never taken, at a facility I had to look up just to learn it existed at all. I understood, reading it, that Marguerite was not simply gossiping. She was building a paper trail of my own supposed instability, one column inch at a time, for a use I would not understand until much later. Harbor texted me that night with a warning about a car service Marguerite had booked for me the next morning, a driver who wasn't the usual one, a route that went nowhere I had asked to go. I canceled the car, I told no one why. Julian found me in the East Wing library an hour later, the first time he had sought me out instead of the other way around. He didn't ask why I'd canceled anything. He set a woolen throw over the back of my chair without a word, the way you fix something you're not allowed to admit you noticed was broken. "You should eat something that isn't tea," he said. "It's not a request I'm making for your benefit, it's for the Accord's optics." I told him his optics had a strange way of showing up with extra blankets. For 1 second, something in his face almost agreed with me, then it closed like a door someone remembered was supposed to stay locked. Harbor's next message arrived 9 minutes after Julian left the room. "Almost eat something," it said. "You look pale even from here." I stared at that sentence longer than I want to admit. Even from here was not a stranger's sentence. It was the sentence of someone who could see me, from somewhere I hadn't found yet. The gala for the Meridian Accord's 1-year mark was Marguerite's idea, staged, she said, to reassure investors that the marriage anchoring their money was healthy. It was, in practice, an audience she had built for herself. Trevor Ashcombe arrived early and stood a half step too close to Camille all evening, the way men stand next to a decision they've been told is already theirs to make. Camille caught my eye across the room once, lifted her champagne a half-inch in something that wasn't quite a toast, and mouthed the words "considerably less baggage" before turning back to Trevor's conversation like she hadn't said anything at all. Estelle Marlowe arrived on Julian's side of the room, and the whispers arrived with her half a second later. Julian's oldest friend, some said. Julian's real choice, said others, back when their families still let him have one, before the Vance contract got signed over his head. I watched him cross the room to her first, before he crossed it to me, and told myself the ache in my chest belonged to a marriage I hadn't chosen, and a woman I'd never met until 4 minutes into someone else's life. Didn't feel like someone else's ache, it felt exactly uncomfortably mine. Marguerite found me by the ice sculpture, champagne balanced like a weapon she hadn't decided whether to use yet. "You're doing so well, considering," she said, loud enough for 2 board members to hear over the string quartet. "Considering the accident, considering the pills, considering how tired you've clearly been of all of this, sweetheart." I asked her quietly what exactly she thought I'd been tired of. She smiled with her whole mouth and none of her eyes. "Being second," she said. You've been tired of being second since the day your mother died and left you a company instead of a mother who stayed. Every board member near that ice sculpture heard it, and not one of them looked away fast enough to pretend they hadn't. Julian's hand found the small of my back before I had decided whether I was going to answer her at all. Marguerite, he said, in a voice with no volume and no mercy in it, if you ever speak to my wife like that in a room I'm standing in again, the Ashcombe name comes off every joint account your family touches by morning. He did not raise his voice once, he did not need to. Marguerite laughed like it was a joke between old friends and walked away already composing whatever version of this story she'd tell Desmond by midnight. I looked up at Julian and asked him why he'd said my wife like he meant it, when Friday's papers were apparently already drafted to say the opposite. He didn't answer. He handed me a glass of water instead and watched, without pretending not to, until I had finished every drop of it. That night, Harbour texted 4 words, saw what she said. I hadn't told anyone Harbour could reach me at a gala 2 counties from my phone's usual signal. I read that message until the letters stopped looking like letters. Contract integrity climbed to 26% that week, and the continuance, with all the warmth of a tax form, informed me I had 19 days left to make it something more than a number. Camille cornered me in the stairwell 2 days after the gala, and for the first time since I'd opened Adeline's eyes, she didn't sound rehearsed at all. Mother said you weren't supposed to wake up this easily, she said, before she seemed to hear herself say it, and went pale in a way no amount of practiced cruelty had ever taught her to hide. I asked her what she meant by that easily. She didn't answer that question. She answered a different one instead, the one she was clearly more afraid of. Desmond was here the night before your accident, she said. Late. I heard him in the hallway outside your room. I thought it was business. I didn't let myself think it was anything else. I thought of a flower pressed flat in a journal, dated 6 days before, marked with 2 initials in ink already going brown. That's not the night I meant, I said carefully. I meant the night itself. Camille's face did something scared, something complicated, and she left the stairwell without answering either question, which was in its own way an answer all by itself. She was afraid of her mother. That fear, not convenience, was the only reason a girl who clearly knew more than she'd said had gone on saying nothing for this long. I didn't chase her down the hall. Some doors open faster if you let the person holding them believe you've already stopped watching. I asked Julian directly, over a dinner neither of us was eating, whether he had hired anyone to look into my family before the accident. His jaw did something small and controlled. There's a transfer, he said, careful the way lawyers teach their clients to be careful. Under my name to a private investigator, dated 3 weeks before your accident. I never authorized it. I asked him who could authorize a transfer under his name without his knowledge. He looked at me a long moment like he was deciding how much of an answer I could survive hearing. Someone with access to a signature stamp I reported stolen 2 years ago, he said. I never got it back. I stopped asking after a while, because asking made me a suspect instead of a victim, and suspects don't get to keep running a shipping company while people wait to slip. That night, Harbour sent one message, it's not him, trust the stamp, not the transfer. I read it 4 times. Trust the stamp was not the phrase of a stranger guessing at comfort. It was the phrase of someone who already knew exactly what evidence existed, and exactly where I would eventually find it. Estelle Marlowe found me before I found her, in a hallway outside a boardroom where I technically had no business standing yet. I'm not his ex, she said, before I'd even asked, like she was tired of being the rumor instead of the person. I'm his sister, not by blood. His parents took me in after mine died in a car accident when I was 9. Julian's the only family I never had to earn. She said it the way people say things they've had to explain too many times to strangers who assume the worst first. Up close, she had none of the softness the gossip columns had assigned her, just a watch that looked more like equipment than jewelry, and the particular stillness of someone used to reading a room for exits, before she read it for conversation. I asked her, since she clearly already knew what I'd been thinking, why he had never corrected the rumor himself. Because correcting it means explaining why we're close, she said, and that means explaining what I actually do for a living, and he wasn't ready to hand you that yet. I run a private security and verification firm. Half our clients are people trying to prove someone framed them for something. I asked whether Julian was one of those clients. She almost smiled. He's been one of mine since the week your accident made the papers, she said. Ask him what Harbour stands for sometime. Then decide whether you're still angry at him for staying quiet. I found Julian in my mother's garden that same evening, of all places, turning one of the flower press's empty pages over in his hands like he was trying to read a language he'd only just learned existed. I didn't know she kept a record, he said when he heard me behind him. I only knew the ritual existed because Bennett mentioned it once, years ago, like a footnote in a much longer file. I told him it hadn't felt like a record until I'd started needing it to be one. He didn't ask what I meant by that. He set the journal down exactly where he'd found it, careful as a man handling something that belonged to someone he was still learning how to grieve and love at the same time, and for a moment neither of us moved to fill the silence with anything at all. Marguerite's cruelest sentence didn't happen in a room full of strangers. It happened at a Sunday dinner, in front of Constance Ashcombe, Julian's grandmother, the one person in either family whose good opinion still bought silence from everyone else at that table. Marguerite brought papers dressed up as concern. Insurance forms, she called them, for your protection, given everything you've been through lately. All they needed was a signature and a witness. I asked to read them first. You don't need to read them, Marguerite said, and the mask slipped so far and so fast that even Camille flinched beside her. You need to sign them and let people who actually think clearly handle the rest, because God knows Eleanor's blood ran thin enough in you without a head injury thinning it further. The table went silent in the specific way a room goes silent when someone has said a true thing about themselves while aiming it at somebody else entirely. My hand found the stem of my water glass and held it hard enough that later, alone, I would find 4 small crescents pressed into my own palm, the only proof I let myself react to any of it in front of someone else. Constance Ashcombe set down her fork with a small, final click. I believe, she said, we are finished discussing insurance for this evening. I did not sign anything. I stopped, in that exact minute, absorbing anything else Marguerite Vance had planned to hand me across a dinner table. I brought the flower journal to Bennett Holloway the next morning, along with the date of Desmond's hallway visit that Camille had let slip without meaning to. D.K., Bennett said, reading the initials under the yarrow sprig, going still in the particular way of a man watching a case fall into place a year too late to have prevented anything. Desmond Kestrel logged that visit as a routine board courtesy in the estate's guest ledger. Cited, the same night your journal says he was here. The signature stamp, I said, the one Julian reported stolen 2 years ago. Who else had access to it before it disappeared? Bennett's face told me the answer before his mouth caught up to it. Desmond co-signed every major transfer with Julian for 6 years before that theft, he said. He would know that stamp's exact weight, its ink depth, everything a forger would need to fake it convincingly on a bank form dated 3 weeks before your accident. I asked him if that was enough. Enough to ask, he said. Not enough to end anyone yet. We need the transfer traced to where it actually landed, and something that proves Marguerite's hand on that wine glass wasn't just a story a frightened stepdaughter invented out of guilt. Camille, I said, she's afraid of her mother, not loyal to her. Those are 2 very different things, and the second one is what gets us a recording. I asked Bennett, before I left his office that day, what actually happened to the company floor if the board absorbed the shares outright. 4,000 jobs move under board discretion instead of family charter protections, he said. Eleanor's old severance guarantees, the tuition fund for employees' children, all of it renegotiable the moment Desmond Kestrel doesn't have to answer to a Vance anymore. This was never only about a marriage. It never really was. I went to Camille again, not to corner her this time, but to offer her the one true thing I had left. I know you didn't know it was supposed to end in a bathtub, I said. I think you were told it would end in embarrassment. Maybe a scandal, maybe a quiet divorce. Not a funeral you'd had to sit through in the front row of. Camille's composure finally broke all the way, not into tears, but into something flatter and more honest than tears had ever been on her. She said it was just to scare you into signing the trust over faster, Camille said. She said you'd never even know it happened. I believed her because believing her was easier than whatever I'd have had to do if I didn't. I asked her what she was willing to do now that easier wasn't an option left on the table anymore. She was quite a long time. Then she told me about a recorder in her mother's study drawer, the one Marguerite used to keep receipts of conversations she thought she might need leverage over later, the habit of a woman who trusted no one, including her own daughter, enough to leave anything unwitnessed. There's a recording from the week before your accident, Camille said. Her and Desmond, I've heard it. I didn't understand what I was hearing until you woke up different than everyone expected you to. Estelle Marlowe's firm traced the forged transfer in 2 days flat, faster, she said, than she'd expected, because whoever moved that money hadn't planned on anyone with real motive ever looking. It landed in a shell account 2 hops from a Kestrel family trust, she told me, Julian sitting beside her for the first time without an inch of careful distance between his chair and mine. Desmond's, not yours. He paid the investigator himself and stamped your husband's name on it, so the Accords board would see motive sitting on the wrong side of this marriage. I looked at Julian and asked him, finally, straight out, whether he was Harbor. He didn't flinch and he didn't lie. Since the week of your accident, he said. I had Estelle's team wire the East Wing for your safety after it happened. I watched more of your days than I let myself be present for, because being present made you a bigger target for whoever was still watching this house. Every warning I sent by text, I meant to say to your face too, in whatever version I was allowed to say it in that day. The blanket in the library, the water at the gala. I was never as cold as I needed everyone else in this house to believe I was. I thought back to even from here, and the water glass he'd watched me finish without once looking away, and understood, all at once, that I had never actually been undefended in this house. I had simply never been told. The false calm lasted exactly 2. Marguerite moved first, and she moved smart. She filed an emergency petition for a temporary competency review, citing my accident, my medication history, and her own quoted words to the family court liaison, a documented pattern of erratic behavior since my hospitalization. If it's granted even provisionally, Bennett told me, voice tight, your voting shares freeze pending review. You'd have no standing at the Accord meeting at all. Desmond wouldn't even need the forged transfer anymore. He'd just need you silent for 5 more days, and the window closes on its own without a single vote against him. Camille's recording was scheduled to reach the board the following morning. Marguerite found me in the hallway that same afternoon, pleasant as a knife wrapped in tissue paper. I only want what's best for you, she said, a little quiet, a little rest, somewhere with people qualified to help you remember which parts of this year actually happened. I asked her whether qualified meant somewhere I couldn't reach a phone, a lawyer or a husband who'd stop being cold to me in front of witnesses. She patted my cheek once, the way you pat something you've already decided is broken. That's exactly the kind of paranoid talk they'll want to hear about, sweetheart, she said, and walked away smiling like she'd already won. That same night, her mother's study was gutted, quietly, professionally, every drawer wiped down like it had never held anything worth hiding at all. Camille called me in tears that weren't performance this time. It's gone, she said. The recorder, everything. She must have found out I'd been in there going through her things. For the first time since I'd opened someone else's eyes in someone else's hospital bed, the number in my head dropped instead of climbing. Contract integrity, 52%, falling. 5 days left to save something, and it had just been taken cleanly out of my hands. I sat on the floor of a room that was supposed to already be mine and understood, for the first time since I'd opened someone else's eyes, exactly how easily a life can be taken twice from the same woman. Estelle called at 6 the next morning, before I'd finished being afraid of what came next. Camille backed the audio up to a cloud drive 2 weeks ago, out of habit, Estelle said. Verification's my whole job. Paranoid is my whole personality. Marguerite wiped the physical recorder. She never knew there was a second copy Camille had already sent me for safekeeping the day she agreed to help you. I asked if it was enough to move the competency hearing itself, not just delay it. It's enough to move today, Estelle said. Bennett's filing an emergency counterpetition within the hour. The board meets on the Accord at noon regardless of what the family court decides. Julian's already on his way to make sure it happens exactly on time. The number in my head climbed back up as I stood there holding the phone. 61%, rising like it understood the difference between something taken and something merely hidden from view. 5 days left, and for the first time since I'd woken up in this life, I had a plan instead of only a countdown. I stood outside the boardroom doors at 11:58 with Julian's hand around mine and no real certainty that 2 days of scrambling could undo 4 years of somebody else's patience. Whatever happens in there, he said quietly, you don't apologize for a single word of it. Not today. The board convened at noon in a room with too much glass in it, built for people who wanted witnesses even when they claimed they didn't. Desmond Kestrel opened with the competency petition calm, rehearsed, citing my accident like a line item instead of a woman who was sitting 11 feet away from him. Bennett Holloway stood before Desmond had finished his second sentence. Before this board rules on Miss Ashcombe's standing, he said, I'd like it entered into record that the private investigator transfer cited as grounds for suspicion against her husband originated from a shell account tops from a Kestrel family trust, not an Ashcombe one. The temperature of the room changed before anyone said another word. Two reporters who'd been allowed in for an anniversary photo op exchanged one glance and quietly stopped pretending to take notes about anything else. Estelle's report went up on the screen next, clean, time-stamped, unambiguous. Then the audio Camille's saved backup filled a silence so complete I could hear Marguerite's own recorded voice say the word sleep like a mercy she'd never once meant it as. Desmond Kestrel stood up halfway through his own recorded voice discussing the reversion window, and sat back down when he realized there was nowhere left in that room to walk to. Julian spoke only once, after the recording finished, in a voice pitched for the board and not for the room's appetite for spectacle. I inherited a shipping company built on the idea that a signature means something, he said. I will not sit on a board that lets a stolen stamp decide who my wife is allowed to be. Then, quieter, not for the minutes anyone in that room was taking, whatever happens to this accord, I am not signing anything that ends this marriage. Not now, and not for anyone here who thought a reversion clause would ever be long enough to make me stop choosing her. Marguerite's face, when the recording reached the part where she said either way, the accord reverts, did something I will remember longer than I'll remember most of this borrowed life. She looked, for one unguarded second, like a woman watching her own name get erased from a family she had spent 4 years trying to own outright. The board voted to refer both the forged transfer and the recording to the district attorney's office. Before the meeting adjourned, Desmond Kestrel was escorted from the building his own father had helped found, stripped of his board seat by unanimous vote before he even reached the elevator. Marguerite's competency petition collapsed the moment the same judge who would have reviewed it received a copy of a recording proving whose competency should have been in question the entire time. A second referral, quieter but just as final, went to the district attorney alongside it, for the wine and the pills and the door that was never supposed to be unlocked. Camille was removed from every Vance company role by the same afternoon vote, and Trevor Ashcombe's family quietly withdrew the backup engagement his own grandmother had never fully approved of to begin with. I did not ask anyone to press charges against Camille. She had handed me the one piece of evidence that mattered most. At the exact moment doing so cost her everything else she had left to lose. I let her keep that. It was the only inheritance either of us had any real right left to give the other. Constance Ashcombe found me in the hallway outside the boardroom afterward, and for the first time since I'd met her, she took both of my hands in hers like something breakable she had decided, finally, to trust anyway. You held that room the way your mother used to, she said. I only met Adeline Vance twice in my life, but I remember exactly how she made men twice her size stop talking mid-sentence. I told her I hadn't done any of it alone. No one worth marrying ever does, she said, and let go of my hands to make room for the one person still standing quietly in the doorway behind us. Camille found me last, by the front door, a single suitcase already packed beside her like she'd known which way this would end before the board had even finished voting. I'm not asking you to forgive the plan I thought I was part of, she said. I just needed you to know I would have told you eventually, even if the recording hadn't survived. I believe you, I said, and meant it, though belief and forgiveness turned out to be two very different things I wasn't required to hand over in the same breath. Where will you go? Somewhere Mother's name doesn't open any doors for me, she said, and for the first time since I'd known her, she almost sounded relieved about that. That night, the continuance's voice, for the first time since it had woken me into someone else's grief, sounded almost gentle. Day 30, it said, contract integrity 100%, directive complete. I asked it what happened now, whether I disappeared the moment the number stopped mattering, whether this had only ever been a loan I was required to give back on schedule, whether Adeline's grief had just been borrowed too, and was due back with interest. It didn't answer in words. It simply stopped speaking altogether, the way a held breath finally lets go, and it never came back. Julian found me on the terrace an hour later, holding my mother's flower press, empty for the first time since I had found it under a hospital mattress. He set something small and flat into my palm before I could ask why he'd come outside without a coat. A single pressed flower, yarrow, still faintly green, dated that exact day. The evening had gone the particular gold my mother's garden always turned right before the light failed completely. The same 10 minutes, Dorothy had told me once, Eleanor used to call the only part of the day that belonged only to her. I learned what the ritual meant from Bennett, he said. I wanted today to have one of its own, in case you needed proof it was real, and not just a number quietly disappearing from your head where no one else could see it go. I did not have to earn a place at this table anymore. I did not have to earn this man either, and for the first time since I had opened my eyes in a stranger's grief, I did not want to leave either one behind. I was already loved. I had simply never been told loudly enough to believe it. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next story.